Welcome to the MetroHartford Alliance video blog, where we compete successfully and aggressively for jobs, capital, and talent. Today we are going to be talking about the Connecticut state budget. With us today, our guest, Patrick McGloin, who is our VP of Government Relations and Public Policy. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you, Brian, for letting me join you.
We have a lot to talk about as far as this budget goes. It seems like year after year there is challenges to the budget, capacities, things that need to get done around the budget. Can you talk about the backdrop of this year's budget and why it's a challenge year after year after year?
Sure. And this year is kind of just the most recent chapter in the story that's been going on for a long time. Basically, since the Great Recession ended, we have seen budget after budget where you basically see revenues failing to meet expenditures. Governors on both sides of the aisle have been faced with deficits that they then need to wrestle with, come up with a solution, which is usually a mix of increased taxes and cuts in spending, and it's a fight that they'll have over the course of these legislative sessions with the Democratic legislature. This is really a manifestation, what you see in the budget is a manifestation of Connecticut's slow recovery from the Great Recession. We tend to, as a state, lag recovery from recessions, and the Great Recession of 2008 or so is really no exception. The biggest problems that we see are slow job growth and stagnant wages. Personal incomes have not really increased much in Connecticut and have actually dragged behind the nation. Personal incomes in 2014 were up about 3.9% nationally and only 3% in Connecticut. So those two dynamics at play really come to a head when you're trying to pull these budgets together and the revenues aren't where you need them to be.
So can you talk a little bit about where we're headed with the upcoming biennial budget? I know there's been a lot of talk about that
Sure.
at the Capitol.
The governor proposed his budget in February. He will typically propose his biennial budget in early February. It was a little bit later this year. He proposed a $40 billion budget. He proposed it essentially as balanced and reasonably within the spending cap. There's been some discussion and some debate about how closely under the spending cap it actually ended up being. But he essentially chose to tackle what was the deficit that he was looking at, or that the state is facing, through a combination of spending cuts and revenue enhancements. I think was probably the term that was used, as opposed to tax increases, because the governor was very clear on the campaign trail to stick to his pledge not to raise taxes. For the most part, you saw the majority of the changes that he proposed in terms of revenues and taxes. More of it fell on the revenue side, with increasing revenues by about $900 million, and then cuts in services to the tune of about $590 million. That is what he's proposing in terms of this biennial budget. It's the budgets which we are sort of referring to as almost as Groundhog Day-esque. It just seems to be in perpetuity that you have these deficits. So for the next 2 fiscal years, we're looking at something in the order of $1.3 billion, and a deficit for the next fiscal year, I think it's $1.4 billion or thereabouts for the fiscal year thereafter. So you really are seeing structural deficits that year after year the governor and the legislature is they're forced to wrestle with.
So as I mentioned before, the Alliance mission to compete aggressively and successfully for jobs, capital, and talent, and to his credit, the governor did offer up an opportunity for organizations like the MetroHartford Alliance and others to propose some enhancements and improvements to the budget.
He did.
I know that we responded to that. I know you worked very hard with our president, CEO Oz Greenbull, and others on this. Can you talk about some of those proposed improvements that are coming from the Alliance?
Yeah, the governor, to his credit, maybe not using the exact words, but saying that there's almost a situation where acknowledging there's no monopoly on good ideas, during his budget address in February invited any constructive ideas that the folks in the state might want to offer to help get the budget into a better place. And we took him at his word and responded with a letter that we developed certainly internally here at the Alliance, but working closely with our stakeholders, our investors, members of the Legislative Affairs Council, who pay very close attention to what's happening in the public policy world here in the state, and came up with some solutions that we think certainly have implications for the near-term budget and changes that could be put in place to improve the situation that we're looking at now for the upcoming biennium. But we really do view these as suggestions or ideas that will yield even better results in future years. And we think that that's the kind of thinking that it's incumbent upon us to really suggest as a leader for the private sector in the capital region and certainly in the state. We want to make sure that we're suggesting workable, achievable changes that are going to help the private sector to do just that, to compete and be in a position to grow, encourage investment, and make sure that the private sector knows that Connecticut is a good place to do business, to come here or to expand. And to that end, the improvements that we suggested to the budget may have a longer impact, but I think that that's an important thing to take a long view when it comes to investing and growing in the state.
That's great background. And that letter actually in its entirety can be viewed on our website, MetroHartford.com, in the public policy section. So anybody who wants more information on that can go to our website, MetroHartford.com, to see that letter in its entirety. You guys did a great job on that. What are the next steps? The budget discussion is really just beginning. Where do we go from here? What can we expect to see going forward as far as the Alliance's role and where this discussion takes us?
Well, the Alliance's role is to make sure that we are letting the legislative branch and the governor know what it is that the private sector and the capital region and as well as on behalf of the state at large are valuing and are looking for in this budget. We want to be very cognizant that the governor and the legislature both have a very serious challenge before them to both meet the needs of the state's residents, but also balancing that against the opportunities and ways that the private sector can grow and expand here in the state. So it's a very delicate balancing act. We're going to encourage them to make sure that they make these choices in such a way that the budget is balanced and that it remains under the spending cap, which we think is critical. We think that those are two ways that you can send a message to the private sector that Connecticut is serious about managing its business in a responsible way. We are certainly very aware of what revenue enhancing opportunities, or if you would call them tax increases, could potentially be coming down the pike that would make Connecticut a harder place to do business. That's something that we would have a lot of concerns about, and we would encourage the governor and the legislature to focus their spending and their investments in the state in such a way that you are spurring growth and job creation. And that's one great thing that we saw during the governor's budget address, where he unveiled his transportation proposal. It's a very ambitious 30-year plan to really revolutionize the state of Connecticut's transportation infrastructure, whether it's highway, rails, waterways, trails. It's really a wide-ranging, very ambitious plan that we think is reflective of the kind of long-term thinking that the state really needs to undertake if we want to invest in the state and make it an attractive place in which to do business. That kind of spending, those kind of investments for the long term, transportation represents infrastructure. There's also important investments in education that are essentially the equivalent of infrastructure, where you're building for the future. We would encourage that kind of spending. Where you see now is essentially the two relevant committees in the Capitol, the Appropriations Committee and the Finance Committee, are essentially in the process of wrapping up their work and holding public hearings. Appropriations trying to figure out what the expenditures, the outlays would need to be in terms of where the budget has made its priorities in terms of spending. The Finance Committee on the other side is charged with figuring out what the revenue picture will be. The Democrats in the legislature who hold majorities in both chambers will be taking the lead, certainly working with their colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and crafting essentially a legislative proposal that would then begin the process of negotiating with the governor. That will be essentially the number one priority of the legislature for the balance of the session, with the goal of adopting the budget before the session ends on June 3rd.
Okay, so obviously a very robust conversation. It's just getting started. Thank you for this. I do need to give you an opportunity to plug May 8th, which will keep that conversation going, Budget Unbundled. down in New Haven. Can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that and how people can register for that?
Yep, this is our second budget the second in our series of forums on the state budget. We're very happy that we have been able to host now for the second time Ben Barnes, the OPM secretary, who will be joining us along with Martin Looney, who is the Senate president, and Len Fasano, who is the Senate minority leader. They will be participating in our panel, along with Spencer Kane, who is a fiscal expert who will be joining them in a presentation. And we're very pleased that the Connecticut Mirror has again agreed to moderate the panel with Keith Phaneuf, who is the Connecticut Mirror's veteran budget expert. It's going to be a lively discussion, and we're looking forward to giving folks really an opportunity to both hear from folks and receive what we think will be important and detailed and up-to-date information, but more importantly, we're pleased to be able to provide an opportunity where the folks who are in attendance can actually ask questions and really roll up the sleeves and get into the details of the budget. That's going to be on May 8th in New Haven at the Lawn Club, and you only just need to go to MetroHartford.com to get more information and to be able to register.
MetroHartford.com for that event and other Metro Hartford Alliance events as we compete aggressively and successfully for jobs, capital, and talent. Patrick, thank you. We are going to continue this conversation and get into even more meat on the letter to Governor Malloy and some of the specific components of that letter with some of our investors and Patrick again. And thank you for joining us today, and we'll keep the conversation going.
My pleasure.